I'd like to stand and take a brief call, and particularly on Clause 27, because Clause 27 deals with the provisional provisions relating to donations. And while we had a contribution from Materia Ture from the Green Party on the issue of donations, this particular clause actually raises the issue of actually why we actually disclose donations at all. And as a consequence, Mr Chair, why we actually need Clause 27 in the bill, or in actual fact why we need any provisions relating to donations in the bill, sir. And I'm surprised that members of the National Party didn't actually take the opportunity to speak on the first part of this bill, sir, because we've had a classic instance in the last week relating to donations. Because here we are, we're arguing whether a party should have to disclose donations of $10,000 or more, or should it be $15,000 or more. But what have we had from the Labour Party? We've had their candidate from the Auckland Mayoralty disclose in the last week that his funds were paid into a separate trust, sir, and that trust in itself wrote a cheque for not $10,000, Mr Chair, not $15,000, but how much do you think, members of the Labour Party? It was $500,000. $500,000. $500,000. Well, the Minister of Police, the Honourable Judith Collins, says big business, sir. But we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know if it was big business. We wouldn't know if it was 100 people putting in $5,000 each. Who knows? It could be Mr Owen Glenn, who wrote a cheque for $500,000. Perhaps Mr Owen Glenn wrote a cheque for $250,000. But how do we justify this, sir? How do we justify it? Well, let's put on the record the fact that the ACT Party actually believes in privacy. The ACT Party actually believes in people being able to go out and spend their own money. And, sir, the ACT Party believes in political parties being able to go out and raise money, and believes in the right of third parties to be able to go out and raise money. And, sir, if you actually look at the justification, what did Mr Brown say when he was asked about the $500,000 cheque that was written from his trust? Well, sir, one of his staffers was reputed as saying, well, our supporters come from across the political spectrum, some left, some right, and they all believe in the vision of Mr Brown. And they'd like privacy. They want the right to donate money to Mr Brown's campaign. They won't want to be disclosed. They want that right, sir. And the reason I raise this issue, sir, is clause number 27 specifically deals with the issue of donations. And so you may not have read it, you've got a big job, but, sir, clause 27 talks about transitional provisions to do donations. And essentially what the ACT Party is saying in voting against this clause is we're saying it shouldn't be there at all. We're saying it shouldn't be there at all because we actually support the spokesperson, Mr Brown. We actually support Len Brown, the Mayor of Auckland, elected by the Labour Party, whose support has said, our supporters come from across the wide political spectrum and they're entitled to their privacy, Mr Chair. That's what he said. They are entitled to their privacy, and we went out and raised this money and we paid it into the Support Mr Len Brown for Mayor Trust, and the Support Mr Len Brown for Mayor Trust wrote a cheque. Now, so the ACT Party doesn't disagree with that. In fact, Mr Banks did the same thing. Let's acknowledge that. Let's acknowledge that both Mr Banks and Mr Brown had supporting them trusts that wrote a cheque for a substantial sum, sir. And all we do, sir, is I'm very conscious of the Labour Party. They'll often put up speakers, sir, and say there's a word for that. You can't say it in this Parliament, but it starts with H, sir. And that's, sir, what we object to in this bill. Because, yes, there are restrictions on donations. There are restrictions what you have to disclose. But what the ACT Party makes, sir, is the point in the same way that the supporters of Mr Brown believe that they should be able to support Mr Brown, whether they're from the left or the right, because they believed in Mr Brown's vision for Auckland. We actually think other New Zealanders should have that same right. If they support the vision of the Labour Party, they should be able to support the Labour Party and have their privacy protected. And the same, sir, those who support the vision, whether it be the vision of the Green Party, the National Party, or the ACT Party, or indeed the Maori Party. People are important to their privacy, sir, and we'll be voting against this part, as Mr Chair, very briefly, in the same reason we're voting against the bill.
Order. I haven't called the member. Just say to the member, despite my request for people to focus on the bill, the member raged over a whole range of things. Yes, the member did mention Clause 27, but even I can see past that. Now, I just say to the member, I'll give him the call if he's going to focus on the part of the bill.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I'll conclude by saying the ACT Party is opposed to this part of the bill, as it's indeed opposed to this whole bill. But we acknowledge the work that Mr Power has done, and we certainly acknowledge that, quite genuinely, Mr Power, I'm sure Mr Power is well aware, this bill is a million miles away from what the Labour Party at the last election inflicted on the people of New Zealand, and he is to at least be congratulated on that. Thank you, Mr Chair.